community ownership is magic for helping bring things to life. So it is really, really difficult to build and follow your dreams as a creator, as an entrepreneur in the world, in general. And I think community ownership is this, kind of magical tool that helps you do that.
Hey everyone, it's Alini again, and you're watching another exciting episode of NewForum. NewForum is a community podcast inviting visionaries, creators, and investors to spark accessible conversations on the topics of crypto, the metaverse, NFT, and everything Web3. Today we have the brilliant Joey DeBruin, ex-neuroscientist who spent the past decade building marketplace and network products. He's also the co-founder of Backdrop, a platform helping everyone participate in Web3 tokenized communities. He also writes about peer production for his newsletter, Flying Penguins. We will be discussing his insights on how he is helping everyone participate in Web3 tokenized communities, the benefit of Web3 tools, the barriers to create UX in Web3, and academia and Web3 as the future of knowledge societies. We will also talk about his vision and mission behind Backdrop. Hey, Joey, it's such an honor to have you on this episode of NewForum.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Awesome. So why don't we begin with you telling our community about yourself and how a former neuroscientist found his way in Web3?
Yeah, that's a long story, but I'll give you the short version of it. So yeah, I was kind of like a neuroscientist in a lab, doing a lot of stains on mouse brains and things like that for a few years. And I left science because I was just very frustrated with the system. It was very bureaucratic, very difficult to actually move forward. And I just didn't align with kind of what I felt, how I felt it should work. And I actually was deciding, I thought I was going to actually go and open a restaurant. I love to cook, but I decided, I worked in a restaurant briefly and decided that was a bad idea. It was very difficult. And so I moved out to, I actually had a friend who was working on a small company in San Francisco, and he said, hey, there's this role called growth. It's like you can be a scientist, but it's like a scientist of the product. You can run experiments, but there's no bureaucracy. You're just limited by your own creativity. And that was just the right pitch for me at the right time. So that's how I got into tech, basically, and worked for a number of different companies there. Most of my time was at a company called Feastly, which is like a chef marketplace. So I was building for other chefs. I was also running my own pop-up restaurant on the platform. So I was kind of like a user and builder of that. So that was great. And that company was acquired. And then I moved out. I got an opportunity to work at a company called ResearchGate, which is the sort of biggest professional network for scientists or academics. And it was a coming home for me. It was kind of a way to combine a lot of my interests and get to work on some of those problems that I'd experienced personally in the lab. And that's, took me up to about 2020. And that's when I sort of got involved in Web3. And for me, the connection was from academia. So I've spent my whole kind of career building for creators and entrepreneurs and the people who really need to think about, like, how do you make money tomorrow so that you can pay your bills and keep doing what you want to do? And, it was just kind of obvious that a lot of really interesting experiments were, being run in Web3, especially around stuff that's generally been hard to kind of make money on in the past. And I think for me, science was that kind of classic example, just like such a valuable thing for the world and very difficult to kind of capture value from digital goods, which is essentially what science is these days. So that's how I got, into Web3. I started working for, some DAOs kind of on the side. And then at some point just wanted to, I'm kind of like a builder, tinkerer. So I just have to get my hands dirty. And with my co-founder, Rafa, he's the same way. And so we just started building Backdrop. And that was, last year around August. And I guess, the rest is short history.
Wow, I think that's a really great story. And honestly, one of my favorite things about, like, I guess hosting NewForum is hearing everyone's story, like how everybody go into this space. And I think it's really encouraging for our community and also just anyone who might come across this episode or this podcast to see that there are real people in Web3, right? And people who are trying to solve real social problems, right? And Backdrop is mostly like focused on helping everyone, in Web3, sort of like building like, how do you call it, like communities and whatnot. So I'm wondering, like, how would you create a Web3 community, and why do you think community in Web3 is important? Also, maybe if you can define what the community we're like talking about right now in Web3.
I mean, I think, as every new product, we are a work in progress, and, we have so many things that we're kind of working on now. I think the problem and the vision that we've had is persistent, even though I think some of the methods and things, the ways we get there obviously change over time. What we started out with was really wanting to understand, to your question of what is a community. I think it's not maybe it is one thing, but it has many different pieces and many different layers. And I guess we typically like use this analogy of an onion. So we think about layers of the community and all of the different, and I think like what's true in Web3, but also in general, is it's not about just getting everyone closer and closer to the core of the onion. It's actually about a healthy community has all these different layers that behave differently and they do different things. And so we were always really interested in the outer layer of the community onion. And I think, that's where you have people that care about, what you're doing. They're maybe not working full time for you, or they're maybe not even, contributing bounties and these kinds of things that we see a lot of in Web3 especially, but they're your supporters, they're your fans, they're maybe your future kind of investors or collaborators. And we just felt like that sort of population of community was not just really being addressed, or kind of, there was no great experience for them because they behave differently. So you don't want, if you're in the outer layer of a community, you don't have to hang out in some place all the time. So you don't want to necessarily be hanging out in Discord all day. You just want to know what the community's up to and how you can continue to support them and these kinds of things. So that's how, that's where we started with Backdrop. And we do feel that, especially as the space evolves and just as kind of work and life in general evolve, that this outer layer of the community is really critically important, because it is so much of, especially as new projects are coming to life, it is the kind of most important layer for actually kind of getting those projects lifted off of the ground. And so more and more, I think we're thinking a lot about how do we actually help people come together and build amazing things and kind of mobilize that outer layer of their community onion, their supporters and fans, and to actually help them come to life. So that's kind of the problem that we're most interested in now.
Yeah, I really like the onion, should I say metaphor, analogy, I don't know. And I also wanted to know what your thoughts are on the difference between speculative and non-speculative tokens, and what's the opportunity for non-speculative tokens to build towards community ownership.
So, I think one of the things that we believe, and maybe it's obvious, at least, or it's becoming obvious at this point, is that community ownership is magic for helping bring things to life. So it is really, really difficult to build and follow your dreams as a creator, as an entrepreneur in the world, in general. And I think community ownership is this, kind of magical tool that helps you do that. And that helps in a number of ways. One, which I think is like the simplest way, is just that if you've ever like gotten a token of appreciation from someone, it doesn't have to be like I'm not even talking about an actual token, like, in the Web3 context. It could be like, they, I don't know, bought you a cookie, or they sent you some flowers or something, but like you get that from someone that you supported, it totally changes your relationship with them. So you're much more likely to help them out. And so when we were starting to work with, we started just focusing on kind of DAOs and tokenized communities, where you have these liquid tokens that are speculative. I mean, first of all, just to be clear, I think speculation is really important for the space in general. I think it's really critical for just, the economy of startups and of bringing, challenging and risky things to life. So I'm for speculation, definitely. But I think when we were just kind of working with these communities with liquid tokens, we didn't have a good way to work with, communities that maybe weren't ready for that. And that's where I think there is this sort of chicken and egg problem, which is my answer to what I think the opportunity is for like non-speculative tokens, is that if you're a new community and you want to delay the time to which you actually need to kind of worry about maintaining an economy, and there are, legal risks, there are a lot of overhead that comes with kind of launching a liquid token. So there's lots of challenges with having speculative, assets. I think there's lots of benefits, but for a lot of projects, they don't actually need those things yet. They don't need the economy, but they so far there haven't been ways for them to kind of create that feeling that those clear connections between them and their community, which is ownership. It's just non-financial ownership. And I think, that is what I feel like the opportunity is for non-speculative tokens, is to start building what I would think about as like layer 0, layer 1, whatever, like the early layers of community ownership in your community. And then at some point down the line, a lot of those projects or some of those projects will, kind of turn the lights on to speculation. And so they will either airdrop tokens back to those owners of those non-speculative tokens, or they will, kind of, there's some ways that you can even just directly turn the lights on to an existing token and introduce liquidity to it or whatever. But bottom line is, I think we need to be able to delay the point at which projects need to like take on all of this risk and all this overhead. But I don't think the answer to that is just to do nothing, like to have no token, because I think tokens are really cool. Like, tokens of appreciation, tokens of proof of contribution, or those are all really important too. And I just think we haven't had as many primitives for those in the past.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing those thoughts. And I definitely love the story approach. And I still on the topic of tokens, I also, I know that like an important benefit of tokenization is that it reduces friction, making it easier for a person or business to reach customers directly. So how can we lower the friction to building tokenized communities? I think maybe we kind of touched a little bit on that, but maybe we can dive into it deeper.
I mean, I think so first of all, if you've never launched a token for yourself or for your community, then it's hard to appreciate how difficult it is. Like, we know this because we've helped other projects with it. We've done it ourselves. It's still super, super difficult. So I think because of that partially creates this environment where tokens are these like, scarce and kind of speculative things, is because I think that, tokens are really just a way to represent, a relationship between, people or objects or whatever. And some of those, tokens, it's really nice to be able to transfer them, sometimes not, but they can be kind of very fluid and flexible sort of primitives that we use, but they're so difficult to make that a lot of those applications, haven't been possible. And so I do think there thankfully are actually a lot of, products and people and whatever communities that are now making it a lot easier, to where if you have an idea for how to, have some ownership in your community, and how you want it to work, but you're not sure how, if it's possible or not. It's easier now than it was to actually, run that experiment. It's still way too hard. So that's like the first thing, is kind of on the, let's say, creator side. Just can creators bring to life their ideas for ownership easily? And I think the answer to that right now is no. Then the other side is the, kind of consumer side. Can consumers easily, build the kind of ownership that they want and that is valuable to them? And the answer to that is generally also no. And the reasons are somewhat different. One is just the kind of wallet issue, which is a simple one, which is just that most people don't have wallets, they're not interested in getting them, and it's kind of difficult to understand how to use them, which means that for any creator, project, entrepreneur, whatever, if you want to represent community ownership, you kind of have to decide, am I like a Web3 project or not? And that's just the reality now. I think that's why I don't think it's a bad idea for, products and projects to build for Web3 kind of audiences, because actually like transitioning people into Web3 is really, really difficult. And I think there are some great communities that are doing that. We need those communities and we need more of them. But for a lot of, projects, it's very difficult to do both, to kind of bridge people over, and help them like get their first wallet, and also go, to the next step, which is kind of starting to interact with what you're doing. So those are some of the kind of like UX complications to community ownership now. And I think it's really just about kind of as a whole ecosystem, just systematically breaking those down and making it easier and easier and easier. And I'm very confident that that will happen. I'm also confident it's going to take, quite a bit of time.
Yeah. I think it would definitely take some time. And I also like that, with when it comes to like tokens, I think like just fans or creators, having people who believe in their work, actually being a part of what they're doing, unlike the current like Web2 platforms. It's quite one directional, so you're doing stuff but then you don't really get to interact. So I think one of the things I really like appreciate about tokens is the fact that your fans can be more involved in like what you're doing. And I think my next question was about UX, and you touched a little bit on it. And I guess maybe I can ask, I think my question was like, what are the barriers we need to overcome to achieve great design and UX in Web3?
I think, if you've been in the space long enough, I'm not worried really about like whether blockchains are going to survive, or like some of these major critiques. So just because once you understand like what's possible, there are specific use cases that are just heads and shoulders 10x 1000x better if you use the kind of technologies that we're building. So I think partially what we need to do now is in terms of providing really great UX is really focus on specific kind of problems, specific use cases, and actually build like products and experiences that are just like incredibly powerful for those. And I think we haven't, in the sort of, let's say, bull market, the time that came in before, I think people got around like providing some of those like really deep and powerful use cases, because just like sort of being Web3 and just sort of having tokens, like it was already enough for there to be value. So because it's just interesting, it's so new, I think that, I think in a good way that is, faded now. So one of the things that we try to do is just every day, like try to narrow our scope and just, how do we really be more specific, more opinionated about the, the kinds of experiences we want to create and the kinds of projects that we, want to work with and things like that. And I think that's true across the board. Someone that I admire also, gave me this advice, which I don't know if it'll end up working out, but I think it is valuable for products in the current, or people to build for kind of niche, like really small niches, and just trust that those niches are going to grow. So if those niches don't grow, if the applications of Web3 don't, grow tremendously over the next few years, well, then I think we'll all be surprised. And I think it will definitely happen. So I think it's actually okay right now, to build for sort of small addressable markets, for niches, and to really just provide like, 10, 100x value in those areas, and then use that to also help like catalyze the space forward. And the only other thing I'll say, which I've been feeling recently, is I do think like, artists and creators are still like the best wedge we have to bringing more new people into the space. I think it's really about helping people imagine new possibilities. And I like, for me, I'm super inspired by, like digital art that, for example, just like behaves very different from physical art. So it's not just like mapping physical art to digital like tokens, but actually programmable, art and things like that. Because I think that's what can change people and just like give them these aha moments that, like, okay, this is fundamentally different. Like this is not just mapping what we had before online. It is totally new primitives. So those are the things that I think I'm inspired by in terms of just, how do we push forward with the UX of the space in general.
Yeah, I think as you were speaking, I kept thinking about human experience, because I think that once we have the intention, or we care about like the human experience aspect of things, I feel like that's going to drive better, user experiences, because that and I like this idea of like focusing on a niche, right? Like I think that's actually a brilliant advice that this person gave you, because for me it's just really connected to the intention and you're like back to this trying to solve a problem for a community, and it could be a small community, but this community could grow, right? And so I think that's a really great mindset. And then I also wanted to ask, so the history of knowledge and the future of knowledge societies, like how has Web3 impacted or influenced this?
Yeah, I mean, we could probably have a whole podcast.
I know, yeah.
I mean, I actually feel like it's more about how Web3 will impact that in the future. But one of the really interesting trends in academia that I thought was really interesting is that if you actually look like in the far past, it was really all about communities. So one of the communities that people know of, or maybe you've heard of, is the Royal Society. It was like the original kind of scientific community. Actually, there was no scientist when that was started. It's kind of like the first person who got paid to do an experiment was part of the Royal Society. Mm-hmm. So maybe that was like the first, scientist as a type. And then, for hundreds of years after that, it's really all of these different kind of communities and societies, and actually that's where the original publications all came from. It's like, so all these publications were society publications that so you submit your work to the society and they publish it. And that's where the like system of reputation and so much of like the backbone of at least like scientific knowledge creation came from these societies. In the digital age, what changed is that distribution, became very scarce, and like, at least very few platforms had the actually ability to kind of get your, knowledge into the hands of other people. So similar to what we, see just with, platforms in general, is like you have this like strong consolidation of power essentially into very few hands. And so actually societies in this change over the last few decades sort of fell by the wayside in academia. And I think what is happening now is the reformation of a lot of these kind of really strong communities that have as one of their core tenets that they produce open knowledge. And I think it works differently in a community context, because I think knowledge can be seen as just one of the many things that you do. You can build your sort of like own economy. So you don't have to just produce knowledge for free. People think about like open public goods as like only funded by philanthropy, or kind of like a nice to have that gets donations. And I think that's, for me, it's kind of limiting. So I actually want a world in which people produce knowledge because it is economically viable, because I think that's the best way to get the most funding to produce more knowledge. And I think more knowledge is really key. So if that makes any sense, I actually do think what we're building is like infrastructure for communities to coordinate, to manage resources, to produce information and other goods, and kind of like route that into an economy. And what I think that means is that we will build very powerful, kind of modern, digitally native societies. I think one of the core things they'll do is produce knowledge. So that's where I see these things kind of like coming full circle.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think that it's all connected to like the future of work, as well, because it's all connected to knowledge and yeah, I think we're all excited to see how everything is going to evolve in the space. And I'm also very excited about what you're doing with Backdrop. And before I ask you to share your social platform, I'm wondering like if you had to share any like last few words to, to our community, what would it be?
Last few words. I mean, I think one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about recently is just that there's no doubt that it's like difficult to build in the space like right now in this moment. There's a lot of, there's ebbs and flows, right? And I think it's very difficult, but I definitely, just encourage people to zoom all the way out to like, and for me, this is helpful for me at least. I don't know if it's helpful for other people, but to like global trends that have been happening for decades or hundreds of years. And when you look at it on that level, I think we are still in Web3 today, running some of the most interesting and like powerful experiments on trends that we didn't invent, and that we are going to be just one step in the long path of. And I think when you look at it like that, to me, it's so exciting that they're, and it's such a privilege to be able to kind of be part of these experiments. And I think it just makes it clear that, no matter what happens, like I think history will look back on what we're doing as just like one really interesting step on a much longer journey that I think is ultimately a very positive one, or at least like a very important one for just our society. So anyways, I think that's just like a word of encouragement to anyone out there who's also building, and hopefully building thoughtfully, like you said, trying to actually make the world a slightly better place.
Wow, thanks for sharing. And I like the word you kind of chipped in there, a slightly better place. Yep, exactly. And yeah, I totally agree with you, Joey. I think the potential of Web3 is exciting, and yeah, great advice. And thank you so much, Joey. Really appreciate your time with us and all the insights and knowledge you shared with me and our community. And I'm wondering, where can we find you on your social platform?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, Joey_DeBruin, and I do write, about public goods and science and stuff at the future Wikipedias at flyingpenguins.io.
Amazing. Thank you all for being a part of today's forum. And if you want to get more involved in our community, make sure to follow us on our social platforms. IG is newcoin.nco and our website is newcoin.org. You can also join our Discord community, and we will have all the links in the description below. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and we will see you in the next episode. Oh, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. See you soon.